Welcome to the late afternoon session of Saturday, everyone. This is going to be the one titled Making Science-Based Decisions in Politics. I don't even remember my own panel's name. Sorry about that. I'd like to first introduce our panel. And let me start with Giulia Conforto, who's a low-carbon energy researcher at eThink. Amardeo Sarma, who's a chairman of GVOP, the German skeptical organization, and Payne, who's a policy program manager at the British NGO Sense About Science. And here with us through Zoom for about 15 minutes, Katalin Cseh, who's a member of the European Parliament and also a medical doctor. So welcome, all of you. And switching to this mic, okay. So first of all, I'd like to address the fact that in the last 2 days, there have been several discussions here that led to mentioning of politicians and the role of politics in making a change and how we shouldn't shy away from dealing with politically loaded issues. And well, we could name a couple of examples, a couple of things from pandemics, the global food crisis, the energy crisis, but there are two recent examples of issues where political decision makers really have to act, and we would really like their actions to be or have been based on science. One of them is COVID, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the other one is global climate change. So, since Katalin has to leave us very, very soon, I'd like to address the first few questions that I prepared with directly to her, and if some of the other panelists have something to add, then they will have the opportunity. However, when she has to leave, we will continue with the discussion. At the end of the discussion, I will open the floor for the questions from the audience. So let's turn first to the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, we saw the emergence of science advisory boards in many, many countries, but there was no common European action taken. So that's a question to you, Katalin, first. Why was that? What was missing for a clear European-wide action to be taken?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for an invite and for the possibility to discuss with you today. And I would also like to apologize for the scheduling conflict that led me to need to leave you a bit earlier. But nevertheless, I'm very glad that we could discuss. And just as a preamble, if you had a debate about whether scientists should shy away from politically charged topics or not, then I would just like to make a plea to you. Please don't, because we really, really need your voice. We are living through times that are very challenging, changes that are very immense, and here the voice of science is more needed than ever before. And of course, I do recognize the difficulty the scientists may or may not have when they enter the political arena. It is not always nice. It is not always based on the language that the scientific community is dominated by. But this is especially why you are needed when fake news is just everywhere, and when discussions about very often scientific facts get more emotional and more political than ever before. But let me turn to the question. So why there wasn't a universal or at least a European-wide response on the pandemic? Well, I think the question here is really pointing to a big problem that we are having with the EU, is that competences of the European Union in comparison with the competences of the member states are not keeping up with the challenges of our times. So a very simple answer to this question is that the EU couldn't do more on COVID because they just didn't have the power to do so. And I believe this is a very, very big problem because we saw very different responses popping up in countries that are just bordering each other. There was no coordination. There was a very big loss of efficiency. And also we failed to save so many lives that we could have done if we would work together. However, reforms of the EU are very slow. And of course, this is also a question that is very political sometimes. You know, who can deal with health policy? Is there any higher power that has competences to override decisions my ministers take or not? This is a very political question. However, another side of this discussion is also very scientific, which is how could we do more good to the people that we represent? How could we be more efficient servants of our society? And if we are approaching reforms of the EU from that angle, I believe it's very clear to say that pandemics do not stop at borders. They do not have passports. They could not be denied entry from a community. Issues are just overlapping. And if we want to listen to science, I think a very important part of it is also trying to adjust our laws and our regulations to the requirements nature is posing towards us. So essentially, which is very often seen as a European constitutional debate. And of course, I do not want to deny the fact that it is also relevant in that part of policy. But reform of the EU is also a scientific question. And I think it would be very interesting to elaborate on this angle as well, in contrary to the discussions we are usually having on this topic in the European Parliament and elsewhere.
In general, what can be said about the level of acceptance of science among political decision makers on a European level? We know that in our Katalin is from Hungary as well, just like me. So we know what the level of it is in Hungary. But what about the EU? So on an EU level, to what extent do politicians listen to scientists and science advisors?
Well, I believe it's very hard to generalize. There are so many types of politicians, and this is why it really matters who is getting elected to a position. And this is also a part where maybe non-political communities could have a bigger say by supporting decision makers who will actually listen to science when they are being posed the hard questions of our times. But of course, there are people, there are politicians, there are parties who tend to be more science-based. And of course, as we very often see nowadays, there is also the other side. The relationship between science and politics has never been an easy one, but I think it has never been as strained as during the past 2.5 years that was marked by the pandemic and, of course, the climate change debate. Because we have to acknowledge that the vectors along which science and politics move are very often fundamentally different. While, of course, both are results-oriented fields, science is in for the long run. Research, innovation, publications, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of uncertainty. In the meantime, politics is in the constant need of immediate success. There is an election coming after election, and it's very easy to get addicted to this positive feedback loop. Scientific results do not always feed this, and this is where the discrepancy occurs when fake news and fake theories are overtaking the voice of reason. So I think it's very important for us politicians to make a very clear choice here, because eventually who we are listening to also means who we are funding, what we are basing our long-term policies on, what kind of approach do we support in our societies. And if we are looking into the climate change debate, for instance, or the response to it, or the pandemics and the surrounding questions, there is a very fundamental change of trajectories that one or another political line of a government could mean for decades of the future of a certain nation. So I would also like to advocate in this community that if you are considering this, please run for office, because we would need more scientists in public offices or in public advisory boards. Please make your voices heard, because it is very, very necessary, particularly when false information is just so much out there, and the public debate is being steered by sometimes very horrendous statements that are in very sheer contrary with the very basic foundations of I think basic level knowledge in one field or the other. So please get involved in the debate and work with us politicians so that we can make better laws for the people and for the communities that we are both part of.
Well, that sounds very good. Let's get back to how. But first, Kellie wanted to say something.
About how well politicians are listening to scientists. And I think this is one of the issues that we're really unclear about. There's not a lot of transparency about the way in which evidence is used in policy making. And we don't know enough about how politicians interact with evidence, and we need to make it more transparent so that we can then evaluate and judge how evidence has contributed to an outcome. So we did a report, Sense About Science did a report looking at the transparency of government decisions, and departments are often appear to have assembled evidence base to inform policy decisions, but they don't share it openly, and they're making it hard for the public and the parliament to understand and to scrutinize their thinking. So we really need to increase the transparency of how evidence is actually being used, and what politicians say that they're basing their decisions on evidence, but they're not showing their workings.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very important point, I think. Katalin, would you like to reflect on that before I ask you the most important question?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that the point you are making is totally right. The level of transparency in politics, I have to say, not only on this field, is, I believe, very much unsatisfactory to the needs and requirements of our electorate, and also for less transparent than what the common good would require. We in the European Parliament, we have a quite solid transparency register. At least we have to record the names of the people who we are meeting. But for instance, the European Council, where the heads of states and governments gather, there is absolutely no clear agenda, no list of meetings anywhere. It is absolutely unclear what is happening behind closed doors. And this, I believe, really fuels into the uncertainty and disdain what many voters have been feeling about the ruling political elite nowadays, and moving towards a greater level of transparency, just as you mentioned. I think it would really serve also those who are making decisions with reasons of why I did that, who is the person behind this study, why is it a good idea in the long run? Because we are very often also being exposed to harsh questions from the press or from civil society, and it would be just so easy if everybody could access our sources, and if the reasoning behind our decisions would be just so much out there, so that everybody could do their own research and look into it.
In this community, saying everybody can do their own research is a little bit risky area.
I do apologize.
No, because from pseudoscientists, we often get that I've done my research, and that only means that they did a Google search. So we keep mocking that thing. However, you said something very, very important, that you wanted us to have our voices heard. Exactly what we want. How do we do that? So from where you are standing, how should we do that actually? How should we start getting our voices heard?
Well, actually, of course, there is much more to be done, I'm quite sure, but I'm a European Parliament legislator, and most of the laws we are working on are very highly technical. And me, myself, and also my team, my advisors who are working on certain topics, we very often getting direct outreach from the scientific community about I am this or that professor, and I wrote a thesis on whatever sub-part of the Green Deal that you are scrutinizing, for instance. Could I send you my papers? Could I make a phone call with you? Could we meet? Could we do a Zoom meeting? And we are really, really trying to meet with as many people as possible. So there are offices that are listening very much so. We love getting papers. We love getting mails about interesting thoughts. We also love being invited for conferences like this one. This is why I really, really feel bad that I can spend less time here discussing with you than I would normally want. But I think this is for an outreach on a smaller scale level, but also maybe science could also do well to infiltrate our day-to-day discussion much better. And I think with COVID, it was maybe an interesting development that journalists were also briefed on scientific topics much deeper than they would be normally. And the public agenda is very often steered by the press. So even if politicians are reluctant to deal with an issue, if it has a wide range coverage, also in social media, for instance, it gets more and more hard to avoid. And I think this is maybe what has been happening with the climate change discussions nowadays, because very often it was only for the scientific community, it was only for town halls, for meetings, but now you just cannot escape this issue. And I'm very glad for it, or at least that it is getting the awareness that it requires due to the urgency that has been going on. So I would really appreciate if there would be more cooperation between between not scientific journalists, but all types of media and science, so that people would learn about what's going on in the world, and they will also ask their lawmakers about it, and they would get pressured, because what we are working very much well with is pressure. We need activists, also science activists, to write us emails that please do better. We are demanding more from you. Here is the evidence. So please reach out to us and try to steer us into the right direction, because, well, we are politicians and our job is really to work for the community who elected us. And that I really hope includes a lot of people who care about science.
Okay, you heard her, people. The job is to get in touch with members of parliament, members of European Parliament, and our own parliaments. So I think we've used up the time that you could allocate to us. So thank you very much, Katalin, again, for joining us today.
Thank you, and have a great further part of the event. And please really be in touch with not only me, but also your local council, your MPs, your MEPs, and everybody who is, getting their money to represent you guys. Make your voices heard, because really the world needs you so much. And thanks for all that you are doing.
I don't mean as a threat, but I'll be in touch. Thank you. Thank you, and goodbye. Thank you. Okay, and with that, I think I'd like to turn to Kellie first, because your organization has a lot of experience with getting in touch with political decision makers, and there is an absolutely exciting program as well that you are the coordinator of, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I coordinate a program called Evidence Week, and it's really, we take a three-pronged approach to this event, where we're reaching constituents, scientists, and parliamentarians, and bringing them all together in Parliament to learn more about how we can bring science into Parliament. So what we do is we get constituents to ask questions of their MPs, and we really try to get constituents to make it clear to the politicians how important evidence is to them. So they will ask questions about things that are relevant to them. So one example we had is someone had an allotment, and they were wondering from their MP what evidence went into making the decision about how big allotments should be. So it's really, they're taking decisions that are really relevant to themselves, and showing the politicians how invested they are in making sure that the decisions that the politicians are making are evidence-based. And the second prong of that triangle is the researchers. And we bring researchers into Parliament to present their research. And really, for us, it's about equipping the researchers with the skills and the knowledge to be able to translate their research into policy, into these policy decisions. So really focusing the politicians on, or the researchers on what parts of their research is relevant to policy and how they can make it more relevant to the politicians. And then we bring the politicians in and we put them in touch with both their constituents and their researchers, and try to get them to learn how to better scrutinize evidence. Sorry, just a sec. Really getting them to understand what questions they need to ask of the researchers and how they can better use evidence to make decisions. So that's the sort of triangle: the constituents, the researchers, and the politicians. And we do this all in Parliament. We first have an opening event where we bring the constituents to ask the questions, and then we have research pods where the researchers come in for 2 days in Parliament in the Jubilee Room. We book appointments with MPs so that the MPs have the opportunity to meet with the researchers. And we also do training for parliamentary staff, so on things like statistics and modelling. So it's really about equipping all of these different actors with the understanding and the knowledge to better scrutinize evidence and use evidence in making decisions.
How do politicians usually react to that? I mean, what's the attendance like when that happens?
Unfortunately, this is going to be my first evidence week. I've just joined the organization, so I'm not sure.
When is it happening?
It's happening in November.
How many of them have happened so far?
So we've had 5 so far, and I think they've been really well attended. And I mean, I think to a degree there might be some self-selecting, that the MPs that are already invested in science and in evidence are going to be more interested in meeting researchers. Especially with the Lords, I know that's the case, that there's quite a big percentage of Lords that are scientists themselves, and they're really invested in scientific knowledge and endeavour, whereas the ones that aren't interested just aren't interested. But we're really trying to make more people interested and more people really seeing. I think just this past couple of years, I think with COVID, I think it's really brought to the fore the reasons why you have to listen to science and why evidence is important. I think it's really made that clear to politicians, and I think they struggled with their knowledge around COVID and their scientific knowledge, and I think that struggling, they want to do better, and I think we've got an opening here to really influence them, to show them how to really equip them with the skills and the knowledge to better evaluate evidence.
So you're both educating the public and trying to put some pressure on the politicians, basically.
And we're trying to show the politicians that from the constituents' perspective, they're really interested in that evidence, and they want that it's important to them that the decisions are made are evidence-based, that they're not lackadaisical, they're not complacent about science, that they're really interested in, and that there's a passion for it from the constituents' perspective. And the MPs really listen to their constituents. If there's one way of getting an MP's attention, it's getting their constituents to contact them personally and bring the problem that they're interested in. That's we've found that's one of the key ways to get into the MP is really through their constituents. So we match up constituent MPs with their constituents.
Okay, and but there are different topics from GMOs to homeopathy, all the way up to the probably most pressing one, global climate change. And I'm pretty sure that the public interest in these topics is very, very different from topic to topic. So what can be done in order to make the political decision makers meet the people at least halfway, so that they act according to the need of the public? So you, Giulia, you are working towards implementing low carbon technologies, right?
Strategies, let's say, yes.
So on what level do you do that? You mentioned in one of our conversations that local
public authorities.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so I'm currently developing a number of European projects for the low carbon energy transition. We support city-level administrations, for instance, the city of Frankfurt, Munich, Osnabrück. We have supported a selection of municipalities in Spain and Romania. Now we're in the middle of a project with networks of municipalities from different countries, and in another project with regional energy agencies. So we do see different levels. The municipality has just the city, the networks has the participating municipalities and all the other members that then they can multiply the effect of whatever they learn towards. And the regional energy agency usually can apply the new tools, the new knowledge, the new process in the whole region. We also work at national level. For instance, we have developed the comprehensive assessment for heating and cooling sustainable energy potentials for Austria. I'd say various levels. Yes.
So now these days, now in the last couple of years, we've seen very harsh weather events then, and seen some very alarming things. It's probably easier to get the attention. But did you have to seek out these municipal governments or regional level authorities, or did they decide to act on something and found you guys as experts?
Part one and the other thing. The public administrations that we work with are mainly very much motivated public administrations. So they are the elite of what can be found throughout Europe. And still, they have, in many cases, very slow progress. So it depends.
So, but would you say that in general there is a shift towards listening more to science on that field at least?
Not really.
So much for your optimism?
No, I'll be very honest with you. I'm not an activist of a skeptical, critical thinking. I'm just a researcher. But what I see is that even in municipalities or networks of public administrations that have committed to a target towards decarbonization or clean energy transition, then finding in the municipality staff and budget enough resources to implement the measures needed to keep their word is really, really hard. It is not easy because climate change is still not perceived as a political urgency by a lot of public administrations. And that has a lot to do with the common understanding of the issue, and that reflects also their electoral base. It might be very different with other topics.
So to me, it looks like there are two very important things here. First of all, we need to have the ears of the decision makers first. But the probably even more important thing is to make them see the needs of the electorate. So, and I'd like to turn to you, Amardeo, because you are the chair of an organization that has achieved a lot in turning the public opinion on something that was previously completely different. I mean, I'm referring, of course, to homeopathy. So, how did the public opinion on homeopathy change as a result of GVOP's actions?
First of all, I think one of the things that we've been doing, in fact, since the very beginning, in contrast to many other skeptical organizations, I know this from the US, where pseudo-medicine, including homeopathy, was not such a big issue. We've had it on our agenda since 1987 and have been continuously informing the public about the, not just that homeopathy does not work, but that there are other associated dangers with homeopathy, like neglecting a useful therapy, maybe killing you, right? Or at least bringing you severe medical disadvantages. So we also, in the last 10 to 15 years, we had the support of a group inside, kind of associated with GWP, called Informationsnetzwerk Homöopathie, which has their own network. And actually, we have one of the people here, Burkhard, who's running the Homeopedia, which gives a lot of information more on the technical side, but there was also more publicly understandable information at the same time. So bringing this across, first of all, as information was very important, but also having some very good and people who come across nicely in the public, in television and so on, who have been promoting, who've been supporting our ideas, and we had the luck that one of those has been someone who's been actually practicing homeopathy in the past and changed her mind because of the evidence. So we're using this as a kind of tool to say, yes, you can change your mind based on the evidence, and this has had a change in public attitudes in Germany. I would say not just public attitudes. If you look at the media reporting on homeopathy, this has changed quite a bit over the last 5 to 10 years. Before, people would either be very positive or just keep out of it, and now it's changed, and there's much more critical reactions to that. And by having formed the base of information, it's now come to the next step where doctors' associations are moving homeopathy as something that you can have as a subtitle. Insurance companies are thinking about changing their ways as well. So it is having a real effect. But here I'd like to come back to one point that Sergio Della Sala made. I don't know if he's still here, but he said at the time that science or skeptics or the organizations that we have can be descriptive. And we can say, well, how things are. Homeopathy doesn't work. But we are not the right people to tell politicians or decision makers what to do. If we want to give them pathways to what to do, we need to know the goals. So what do they want to achieve? That's a political decision. That's not a scientific decision. And I think we need to separate these two things, and I think our role should mainly be on providing the right kind of base information. And if you say this for homeopathy, of course, we are not the big experts on energy systems or other things like that, but I would say people need to get really clear information from the experts on these issues so that they can make decisions. They can also look at things like what are the targets, and they can do pathways towards that, like the IPCC does. If you want to get to 1.5 degrees, here are 4 alternatives. If you want to get to 2 degrees, here are the ways you can do it. They can provide pathways, but they can't tell you 1.5 degrees is it, or 2.1 or something like that, because that's a political decision based on all the kinds of interests that different people might have, right? And what do you want to balance against it, prosperity and many other things like that.
But I think one thing that scientists need to do, though, is to really understand the policy context in which their research is dealing with. And I think it's something that scientists often neglect, to really investigate and research the policy context that they're contributing to. And I think that's something that it's a skill that we need to upskill scientists to be able to really address policy concerns and make sure that when they're communicating their research, that they're communicating it in a way that is going to have cut through and have traction with politicians. Because I think politicians they have different timescales. A scientist would like to have a 5-year double-blind study, whereas politicians need to make a decision on Monday, and they need the evidence right away. So I think scientists understanding the timescales that politicians are working with, the decisions that they have to make. I think there's a lot of understanding that needs to go into the way in which scientists approach politics that can be learned.
Yes, I agree with that, but at the same time, much of the research on things like homeopathy, or understanding of homeopathy, or understanding climate change, how energy systems work, has been done already. So we don't have to start a long process of understanding the science behind it. A lot of it is already known. But what we still need to do is to understand what policies are intended, what are the targets that policymakers have, to be able to say, how do we want to get there? If you want to say, for example, in health, we want to have less people dying because of pseudomedicine, we have some good ways to tell them how to do that. If they say we need to globally achieve 1.5 or 2 degrees centigrade more, the IPCC does that. We can get together the experts, and this takes a long time to consolidate the information. But this can be provided, and then you have the option of saying, okay, these are the 4 pathways. Each of them have assumptions. Which assumptions do you think are going to be right? And then make your decisions based on that. But we can't say choose pathway 3 out of the 4, because that's really a political decision. And you have to understand what are the boundary conditions that politicians want to have in that.
Yeah, we have a saying in the UK that scientists advise and ministers decide. So it's very much that the scientists can only give the advice and give their evidence, and it's really the ministers that will make the decisions.
Exactly, and I think the part of the problem is then that the moment scientists start in the name of science advising governments to take a particular path, it's bound to be that they're going to have their own preferences and balances of how they see the future play a role in that. There's no way of getting out of that. And that's, I think, what, at least in conveying scientific results, you have to keep out of, is my opinion. Because otherwise, politicians might have different priorities. They might want to weigh that, how much weight are you going to give to maintaining prosperity, increasing prosperity. This is especially for Africa and Asia. So we can't tell them don't burn carbon in a way, because they first of all want to lift their population to a level in which they can feed them properly, right? So there's always a balance of interests, but we have to, and I agree, we have in the long run to go to a low carbon or almost zero carbon environment, but that's going to be a long way, because it's not just the electricity. We've managed in some countries to reduce the carbon emissions from electricity production, but that's only part of it. We had the discussion on eating meat, for example. Especially there, you have to also differentiate. Cattle have much more emissions than, let's say, pork, swine, or other kind of fish, maybe. But so there are differences there as well. So you have to set your priorities there, and then politicians might have to make a decision based on, for example, they have farmers who are breeding cattle. You can't just tell them, okay, from tomorrow on you have no work anymore. So there's a way you have to find pathways, but that the politicians have to decide. We can only say that having too much cattle is going to be bad for the environment. That's it.
Let's hear the expert.
No, I'm not the expert, but if I may react on that. Politicians tend to listen to science, if I may also retract what I said earlier, when that helps them suggest or make decisions that are popular. And the science about climate change indicates a number of decisions that are very unpopular, because the reason why we are assisting to this climate change is because we are using too much of everything. Too many resources, too much energy, we're producing too much, we're using too much, we're wasting too much, we're also using the wrong resources, and we're using them in a very bad way. So we would have to restructure not only the energy industry and the way we use energy, but the whole economy, because we have set up an economy that is bound to grow forever. And, you know, a healthy indication of the economic state of any region or country is if the production, the GDP is growing. If the inflation is around 2%, and there is no grouping of living being on this planet that is constantly in a healthy state, keeping growing year after year after year. I mean, what I know is cancer grows without being stopped until the host is not there anymore. And, sicknesses. Just one more point. When we say that science hasn't been cleared about what should be done for climate change, I would respectfully disagree. Since the 80s, we know that we should just use less fossil fuel and use less energy in general. That is as simple as that. Any other option that is not using this much energy, wasting this much, and using this much fossil fuel is a better solution. So that is already in the hands of the politician. It has been ignored, it has been postponed for many reasons. We can blame lobbying from energy industries or energy-intensive industries. We can blame the fact that the public was not perceiving the message strongly enough, so they were not prone to support politicians who were strongly promoting the energy transition. But also, if I may, just one more comment. You mentioned that there are countries that are interested in the growth, the economic growth of their own population, for instance, a lot of African states. On average, a sub-Saharan African citizen emits less than a ton of carbon dioxide per year. We emit on average 6 tons in Europe, the States and Canada 15, 16 tons, and to avoid a global warming higher than 1.5 degrees with a 66% of probability, we should emit on average 2 tons. So we are the ones in the global north who are causing climate change. For a developing country to support growth without overpassing their, let's say, ideal share of emission, which should be as little as possible, is not that hard. Also, there is a lot of debate on diet and how moving away from a meat-intensive diet towards a vegetarian or a vegan diet can do a lot. It is true that one person over a year time, moving away from a meat-intensive diet towards a vegetarian or a vegan diet can save a ton of carbon, 1.5 tons, but flying to New York and back is 2 tons already. So we are, each one of us, and I don't want to blame anyone, it's just to put things in perspective, each one of us is already 4 tons beyond what we should be emitting if we didn't want to overpass the 1.5 degrees. So all these narrative about the developing countries that need to support their growth, things like going vegan or vegetarian are just distraction to me. They are moving attention away from the elephant in the room, that is fossil fuel and the way we consume energy. This whole building is a Gruyere of it. Every building we live in is extremely energy inefficient. We should restructure and do thermal renovation of most of the buildings in Europe. And who wants to spend money to have their house redone completely? It is uncomfortable. Who wants to spend less and buy less and consume less? It is very unpopular as a choice. This is the reason why I say that science is not listened much to by politicians when it points in the direction of very unpopular choices. Sorry for the long reply.
There is one thing and one topic that brings about a situation where it was not the case. COVID. When COVID hit, the people and the politicians acted very, very quickly, and very harsh actions were taken. So what's the difference between that, between the fighting global climate change and fighting a pandemic?
If I can give an answer to that, I mean, there's one clear difference, and that is that COVID has a very short time scale to react. You have to react. It's like an asteroid hitting you. You can't start, making big discussions. You have to take action immediately. And in fact, it could be debated whether the COVID reaction was fast enough, because I think what we need for cases like that, when there's an immediate danger, is that you have to you have to have something like an emergency reaction for the whole of Europe, where you can really take decisions quickly. And you have to also look at balance what happens if you can, for example, at that time take a lockdown for a very short time, but do it across Europe and kind of kill the disease. Is that going to be more effective than letting the disease develop and then all the consequences after that? So I'm not sure actually we did react quickly enough. I think we could have done that better, at least at the European level or even globally. And you can only do that if you have, we have to, in fact, I think, set up a kind of emergency reaction team at the European level to take care of such emergencies. I'm not just talking about diseases, it could be other emergencies that need immediate reaction. And that's, I think, the difference between climate change and COVID. Because climate change is a slow process. You don't immediately see the effects. You see on the temperature side, you see a lot of effects that have come up. You can clearly see that the Earth has warmed already by 1.2 degrees. But what I think is missing, and this is, some journalists have done that, like I would highly recommend the book by Mark Linus on 6 degrees, because he actually shows you what does it mean if you have 1 degree more, if you have 2 degrees more, 3 degrees more, 4 degrees more, 5 degrees more, so that you have a kind of basis for also public pressure on governments to move towards a zero carbon economy. And I agree with the target. But what I'm saying is it's going to be a lot more difficult achieving that, and we've seen that in the past, that there's so many conflicting interests that are more immediate, which you can see with the energy crisis right now. Germany is starting coal power plants again. So that's completely ridiculous in a situation like that. But there are always interventions for political reasons. They want to do something else, right? And that's something we can discuss, how these immediate concerns play a big role in delaying action for things like climate change. But I just wanted to point out, it's more than just decarbonizing the electricity system. It's a huge task ahead of us, and we still have, I think, about 80% of our energy production is through carbon, through coal, oil, and gas. Right?
But also, I think the actions that you can take to prevent climate change versus the actions you can take to prevent COVID, they're much simpler and they're much more accessible. So, not wearing a mask and self-isolating is something very clear to do, and it's very easy. It doesn't take it's not taxing. Whereas reorganizing the entire energy system and the entire economic system that we're based on, it's the ways in which you combat climate change. It's a lot more intricate, and it's not as straightforward as. I mean, it's straightforward in the sense that you just need to stop using fossil fuels, but enacting that is a lot more difficult than it was with COVID.
Yeah, and saying that stay home is a relatively easy solution to everything, but not with the energy crisis.
If I may comment on that, yes, you are absolutely right. Reacting to COVID changed everyone's life, but didn't disrupt the economic system at its core, while reacting to climate change would mean not only a shift in the energy supply and the way we consume energy, but also a shift in our concept of how we use resources in general. Not only that, and what you mentioned briefly before, one more reason why climate change is different from COVID is because of externalities, external costs. So we have seen, Elisa was also mentioning yesterday that the 1% richest people in the world are responsible for about the emissions of the poorest 50%. We used to take another figure in my research group, that is the 10% of the population, the richest population is responsible for 90% of the emissions. So the way the emissions and the energy consumptions are distributed is not the same way the effects of the climate change and the global warming is distributed. So what we have seen in Europe the last couple of years, heat waves, floods, massive storms, other very unusual and very strong weather events. This is happening with 1.1 warming. 1.5 is scary, and we have been taking 1.5 as a target for a long time because that was hard to achieve but still achievable, and we have been probably conveying the wrong message that 1.5 would be still fine when it is not fine. It is, personally, I see it as a catastrophic target, 1.5. And the truth is that we do have this kind of studies on what could happen with a 1 degree, 1.5, 2 degrees, 2.5, but they are estimates because we don't really know what could happen because many processes are not linear. So we're heading in the dark night. There was a quote, who was Jon Rockstorm, who wrote 2 very important articles, among many, many, many others, on the planetary boundaries. So a number of indicators that can be used to evaluate the level of health of this planet, how probable it is that the planet continues in the equilibrium that we have known so far. And he said we're going at full speed on a car with the lights off in the night. Maybe we want to switch off on the lights, so at least we know where we're going.
That takes energy. Be careful with that. Okay, but there is, that's not the only 2 issues that we face. As skeptics, we usually want to change the political environment about everything. Healthcare, we want, homeopathy is something that we want to get rid of, but all the other kinds of quackery. And we need something that, some action from decision makers as well, to provide the right political environment for those to be, if not weeded out, but at least challenged properly. So to what extent is it our job? To what extent is it the job of non-governmental organizations? And how much should we pressure the actual politicians? So we've touched on how the public opinion can be stirred, as we've seen it with GDP's actions. So how should we see our own role in this system, according to the 3 of you?
If you talk about us as skeptics and as science-based organizations,
yeah.
Okay, then I still think I'd come back to what Sergio said, saying that it's our job to provide clear information as to what, as far as we have the capacity to do it. In the homeopathy, we have it. In the case of things like energy systems, we have to be different people. But we need to provide the facts about how things are, describe the world as it is, and if there are targets, also the way the world is going, and trying to point out that if you go to 1, 2, 3 degrees, this is what's going to happen. If you're going to have a pandemic, these are the possible consequences. These consequences are also part of the story. We can also go one step further and say that if there's a clear target set by the policymakers and by politicians, then we have maybe 2 or 3 different paths that we recommend to get to that path. But we, as a science-based organization, are not responsible for making policies and telling the government whether they should keep 1.5 or 1.7 or 2.0 degrees, because that is a decision that has to be made based on all the considerations that the politicians have. That's not a scientific decision. It's our role to provide pathways towards the goals that are being defined by policymakers.
Excuse me, but then it could be argued that it's a policy decision as well to not to support homeopathy or other kinds of quackery on public health care system.
Right. What we say is you got to base. I mean, that's what the policy. That's what we say here. Base your decisions on science and the current status of science, and that's what we should be asking politicians. And not to say homeopathy works, or climate change does not exist, or things like that. But once again, for example, I mentioned the case of meat eating, right? If you're going to say prohibit meat eating, Then you have to have a balance with the people who are actually meat producers. What are they going to do? Are they going to lose their jobs? What about the farmers that have been doing these things? So policymakers have to really make a compromise about with various things that they want to support. On the one hand, climate change, but they also want to have that their farmers have a good living, which we can understand. And so they will be forced to make a compromise and say, this is our target based on the various things that we've considered. But the one thing that we can say is don't do things that are clearly not supported by science, right? So burning more coal certainly is not going to help you reach the climate targets, because we know that carbon burning causes emissions, and the emissions cause, for a doubling of the carbon dioxide, you're going to have 3 degrees more in the midterm. We know that, so we can tell them don't ignore that. But also perhaps we can tell them, but watch out. You know, 3 degrees is just the median, it's the middle. It could be less, but it could also be more. You have to consider the fact that this has a complete range, and you cannot just rely on it being just 3 degrees. It could be more, so make your decisions taking all these things into consideration. That's what I think we should be saying.
Okay, Kellie, and then
I was
Giulia.
just going to answer what organizations like ourselves should be doing. And I think we see ourselves as a campaigning organization, so we really bring together a lot of sort of coalitions of different people that are interested in our topic. We do a lot of research, so researching and providing the evidence. One of the examples of a really successful campaign that we worked on was one called All Trials, where we campaigned to get all clinical trials registered, and that was a really successful campaign, and it really brought
Which
together.
is still ongoing, right?
It's still going. We're currently working to get it made mandatory in the UK. So I think there's a really big role for organizations like ourselves to bring issues, really identify, scope the landscape, and find out which issues are really relevant, and bring together the right partners together to campaign and lobby government.
Can you elaborate on the All Trials campaign, because there might be some people who are not familiar with it, and why it has, and then we get back to the original topic with Giulia.
I don't know that much about it, but All Trials was to increase clinical trial transparency in the interest of patients. It was a European directive for clinical register of clinical trials, and to conduct a clinical trial, if you conduct a clinical trial in the EU, that it would be registered.
So it's basically about transparency.
Transparency,
yeah.
If I can just add to that, I mean, the idea behind that was that a lot of the trials that were being done were not being published. So you were getting a selection that could be either skewed to the positive or to the negative side. You had no clue as to how many of the trials disappeared completely. So the idea was that if you want to have your trial counted, you have to register it in advance, and then you have to publish what the results were, independent of whether it's positive or negative. That way you get rid of the so-called file drawer problem that we also know from parapsychology, that you just take the results that suit you and drop everything else. So I think that was an excellent example of an initiative that should be done to promote independence and prevent vested interests from having trials that go in a particular directions.
Okay, Giulia, getting back to the role of non-governmental organizations and experts and all that.
I think that you could do some lobbying in one very basic element, increasing investment in education and research. It all starts from there. We live in a society that doesn't value science, apart a few examples that are very enlightening, like the group of people that is gathered here these days. But I don't know many other people outside of my circle of colleagues and researchers who gives a lot of importance to the science behind their choices in their everyday lives. And a lot of individuals are non-rational thinkers. They choose with their belly. They go by sympathy or, yeah.
So let me make an exception when I said we shouldn't be forcing policy decisions on. I think there's one exception, which is basically what we're doing, science and critical thinking. So any investment, we certainly are going to ask for investment in critical thinking, whether it's in schools or elsewhere, and we certainly want to increase the amount of money put into research and I think that's something that, and in science-based organizations. So I think that's the exception, because that's part of our DNA, if you like. But beyond that, I think we should be careful, and because otherwise we'll be caught up in completely different interests. And we should try and avoid that and just say, okay, if that's the target, this is the way to go. Or these are the alternative paths you can take to go to that goal.
If I may build on that, it's a pity that Katalin is not here anymore, because I would be interested in hearing from a politician, where is the limit between the freedom that has to be left to individual choice and the limit where regulation has to be put in place to preserve citizens from hurting themselves. Right. Climate change is something that we have let slip out of our hands, and it is gonna hurt all of us. Appliances, efficiency standards, safety regulations on anything, toys, dishwashers, cars, all these spaces had a border, and the border was, okay, everyone should be free to do as they want, as long as this is not gonna be harmful for the individuals. And what we are doing with not putting a cap on our emissions, not pricing emissions, not pricing the external costs of using fossil fuels, allowing freedom in the amount of energy that we use, allowing all sorts of consumption that is not strictly necessary, from my point of view, is likely to harm a lot of people and should be better regulated, not prohibited, of course. We know prohibition doesn't help with solving issues from the previous session.
Yeah,
let me just also add one thing here. I think we should also not allow the politicians to delegate policy making to the scientists. I mean, it's their job. We're paying them for doing that.
Keep them as
advisors.
So
we will give them the science-based information that they need, but the policy making is their job, and you got to better do it and not try to say you are responsible for a failed policy decision or something like that.
But I think the researchers need to make sure that they stay out of the ivory tower and come in
sure.
and really make sure that they're making their evidence useful to politicians and making it accessible.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's turn to what we actually can do. So how do we do that? And I'm speaking to all of us now. I think we all agree that we have to act. So we have to try to get the ears of the public when it comes to science and critical thinking. We need education. We've covered that angle earlier today. And we need to put pressure on the political decision makers as well. So, what can all of us do on an individual or organizational basis? And they got silent.
If you want me to answer that, well, I think we have to provide more and more science-based information to have a good basis for policy decisions. And we need to, beyond that, also make sure that it's known, that the people have access to that. And I think what goes beyond that, it'll be very helpful, as we had in the discussion before with the drugs, that the politicians alone are not the people to address. We also need to address the general public, because sometimes the politicians will only change their minds if the public puts pressure on them, if the voters put pressure on them. So I think our job really is to promote critical thinking, starting from the schools. I still stay with that, and that we provide more and more information. And for the skeptics organizations, there's a whole wealth of information that we have already. Let us connect them globally, use publications in different languages, information in different languages, provide it, and make sure that the policy makers also read it, not just the public.
So is this the question of dissemination of information?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think we need to equip the scientists with the language and the ability to communicate well to politicians.
Yes, I agree completely. Yeah. Which we do very badly at the moment.
If I may, I will build on my experience of what happened with the energy transition. There are a few very interesting documentaries, if you haven't happened to watch them. One is on YouTube from Arte. It's called, sorry, my terrible German, Die Macht der Lobbyisten. So there should be the strength of the lobbyists. And basically it's a series of interviews to oil and gas company lobbyists who were paid to go on TV shows back in the 90s and beginning of the 2000s to put doubts on scientifically based theories. What happened was that scientists, very strong in their field, were succumbing in a conversation with a professional PR, of course, because scientists are good at doing science and a communicator is good at communicating. So, seen from the outside, I would say, why not equipping yourselves with some professional communicators and make use of those competencies to communicate better, to communicate to a wider public the results of science, but not only the content of science, but that scientifically based decisions and results have more value than non-scientifically ones, that let the charm of science come back. Let's look simply, I take an example that has nothing to do with energy, at what happened with the law on abortion in the States. We thought that that would have never been put under discussion, that was safe. We secured that back in the days, and then lowering our guard, look at what happened. Because the guard was lowered, because of course it was a chain of events, and then Republican democracy and so on and so forth. But as scientists, we have for a long time been focused only on doing our science and be very solid in what the results of our research was. And we were not paying much attention in diffusing science, whatever was our field, outside of the scientific field, towards all the other people who don't do science, but might be interested in it or might find it charming, fascinating, because that's what it is.
Okay, but there are a couple of good practices there. Sense About Science is one of the organizations that can definitely teach us a lot about how to engage and give you pay as well. But we need the experts as well who can connect with the politicians. But please, everyone, find your MPs and MEPs and push them. Not over the cliff, but just. We might need them. But I can see a couple of hands up in the air. So now we are opening the floor for the discussion. And we start with the first one, and then please line up here for the questions. Thank you. And I'd like to thank our panelists, Kellie Payne, Amardeo Sarma, and Giulia Conforto. Thank you very much. And also Katalin Cseh, who are here. And let's hear those questions.
Okay, so you ask what can everyone do? So you can vote. We live in a democracy. You can vote.
If you have that.
For the right politicians, and you can, for example, go to climate protection protests or other pro-science protests, and publicly support scientists, and you can discuss in your family, with your friends, these issues.
Yeah. Do you want me to repeat what you said? Okay. So if someone didn't hear it well, so Josef said that there are a lot of things you can do. You can vote if you live in a democracy. You can go out on the street and protest for scientific issues. You can go into discussions with your own family and publicly support scientists. I hope I didn't leave anything out. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Next one.
Yeah, I would like to point out from experience two things that might help in order to influence the public as well as journalists and politics. One thing is find a protagonist that is media compatible. That is, for example, a communicator. And that is the hardest thing of them all. Find somebody who is presentable, who is eloquent, who is willing to take all the flack, the threats, the hatred, etc., the media. In our case, the Information Network Homeopathy, we were very lucky to have Natalie Grams, who has taken all that for a number of years, who is still on our side, and who is still a celebrity. Look at the German movement that's called Fridays for Future, which is kind of a bit controversial, but they have found somebody who can be put on talk shows, etc., and they are very successful in influencing public opinion, which in turn makes politicians think about who they get their voters from. So influencing the public is always the first step. The other thing is, if you want to do something...
Can I just come?
Yeah, sure.
We have a prize at Sense About
Prize.
Science, where it's called the Maddox Prize.
Yes, I know that.
Oh, and we try to we address a scientist who's faced adversity in their communications and has gone above and beyond the scope in facing if they were being shut down because of the way in which they were communicating, and they've come out of that.
We have proposed Natalie a few years back for the Maddox Prize. Yeah. But she didn't succeed. The other thing is, if you want to reach something in some field, I mean, everybody of us has a lot of opinions on things like the educational system, the public health system, etc., etc. If you want to be successful in one field, you have to become monothematic. So I have my views on alternative medicine and on the energy mix and things like that, but under the brand name of Information Network Homeopathy, we only do one thing. So be a spearhead, and if you want to do other things like anthroposophy, educational system, build another brand name, and under that name, you do these only two things. So that's a little experience from what we did like 6.5 years ago. It will still take a long time. Politics works extremely slow. And the best thing we can hope that at one day, the legislation in Germany will be changed without a big discussion, because it is then commonplace to change it as it is. So that was less than a question than just a remark.
But thank you very much, and thank you very much for your excellent work at Information Network Homeopathy. And yeah, good luck with the rest of it. And since my pet topic is translations, if I'm not mistaken, you have a lot of material up on the website in English.
Yes, you also have something that could be easily translated. Yes, there is another website that I'm attending to, and that is more like a Wikipedia thing. So that is extremely scientific in language, able to be understood for people who have not an academic education. And I think with DeepL, those things could be easily translated. So, just give us a call. We'll be really glad to help.
You heard him, people. Okay, next question.
All right. So I teach undergrads and master's student level science communication, and I'm preparing next semester a class on PR and public relations. Which skill, that's for the panel, goes for everyone if someone wants to add to this perhaps later. Which skill do you think my students should develop in a PR class?
I think the ability to read the policy situation, so understanding the policy context and developing the ways in which they communicate to answer those those policy questions. So really getting more political savvy and really understanding the political context in which they want their science to address.
If you say PR, right? How about taking someone from the private sector? Because from the private sector to come and show them how they do that, because we know PR in public administrations is not exactly the greatest. I mean, a couple of years ago during the pandemic, the Italian government chose to use influencers to get the message across to wear masks and stay at home without telling them to not say that, and they blew up the plan. So I go to the private sector.
And I think it like learning to simplify their results, so making it much more easy to understand and stripping away the esoteric language and the sort of the ivory towerness of their research to make it a little bit more communicable.
Let me just add, I think also, I agree, we have to come across also with more empathy. That's one thing, just not hear the facts and you take it or leave it, but also communication in general. So I think there's a lot of work to be done to improve that.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Georg from Berlin. I would like to maybe slightly challenge the idea that scientists can't offer policy prescriptions and advertise for those. I think this might be true speaking strictly about scientists while wearing their scientist hats, but every scientist is also a citizen of a country, and not every skeptic is a scientist, like I'm not one. And echoing some of the things you, Giulia, said about climate change, I think for sure we can't precisely say as skeptics, oh, you have to do X amount of CO2 in X amount of years, but I think we can very clearly state that drastic action is required on a shorter time scale, and any other position is delusional. And I would also like to remind us that politics is not a level playing field. There are countless lobby organizations out there applying pressure on policymakers all the time. That is the best case scenario in countries that still have a functioning democracy. And I'm afraid that if we are not prepared to be the lobby for critical thinking and evidence-based decision-making, then maybe nobody's going to be. And to turn my soapbox moment into technically a question, wouldn't you say that maybe, sure, we should choose our battles, we should apply our energies wisely, but maybe here and there we can dare to be a little bit bolder and apply more direct pressure on policymakers. Thank you.
So I wanted to comment on the idea to give scientists better communication tools, but when thinking to the pandemic, and in Germany there was Christian Drosten, which was doing research on precisely coronaviruses, and he felt the moral need to communicate or start communicating and not just being an expert advising the politicians. And he did this just because he felt like he is in duty for society, but in the end he was happy to get out of the public again, because he is in the first place a researcher, and he needs to spend so much time on getting grants, getting money, doing his research and all this stuff. So asking, in addition from them, to be in the public is a really hard thing. And so I think just we need more people that maybe have been in science and become communicators, so they can be trained in communicating and what is the way to communicate, but still have a background how universities are run and how papers are written, and have some sense of how to read papers and then have the transition. And I think that this bridge has been underestimated for so many years, and it's just a massive amount that needs to be taken again seriously, and as well not just having people to have this kind of directly going for science communications, but I think many people could go coming from different backgrounds, from psychology. Just having a mixture, all of them, would be the best, and not just telling, you need to be a journalist to do this, to have this, but the mixture would, I think, be the best, and let the full experts do their job, because this is already quite a lot that they need to do.
Let me comment on this and also the previous one. So first of all, I think Drosten did a very good job in communicating. So I think that's without question. And I also would like to restate that I think we should pressurize the politicians to make all their decisions based on science. There should be science-based decisions, and they should take evidence into consideration and things like that. That's absolutely clear. But the moment you start, and that's where I would differ, you can, of course, as a person, I could change my hat and say, not as a scientist or as a member of the organization, I suggest we take this path because I think such goals are needed. That's perfectly legitimate, and I think we should, but we should not say that science tells you to do that. Science does not tell you to do that. Science just gives you various pathways to a target that you can, as a citizen of the country, as a citizen of the world, you can say what your preferences are and say, I want to go this way. That's perfectly legitimate. We have to just separate the two things.
For coronavirus, for the pandemic, it was like the epidemiologists were saying we need to do this in order to prevent the virus from spreading.
Yes.
But I think there was other sciences not heard that much. Well, like getting children out of school so long to be at home, what were the psychological impacts on this? And we were not prepared for all of, because we didn't know what to happen. So in certain points, it was like we were listening too much for just the experts on epidemiology, and other from social science or psychology were not heard enough because, it was the new arrivals and.
Yeah, but there is something, if I may, there is something about this that needs to be said. If your house is on fire, first you have to put out the fire.
Exactly.
So you cannot do anything else until that's done.
Yes, and I'd like to come back to my suggestion. We have to have at the European level kind of emergency reaction team, and it's not just the expertise in the topic. We need to have to understand the risks, the range of risks, and what action needs to be taken, and take an informed decision quickly as to, in this case, whether to lock down all of Europe, maybe for 3 or 4 weeks, so you ban the danger forever, or you just, keep on getting, you have to decide on the spot, and that's something you need the expertise for, yeah.
And you need the public opinion as well. Gábor Kemenesi was here yesterday. Probably you remember his talk about the pandemics. And, he was on TV all the time, communicating the science of epidemiology and virology. And still, Hungary was lagging way, way, way behind other countries when it came to the trust towards science in terms of mitigating the pandemic. So it was an interesting situation. But he had to go back to his lab to do the work that he actually does. And the others who were experts could not communicate that well. So we're back to square one with communication, and that the dissemination of science and scientific ideas is a different thing. Sorry.
Just a short background and then my question. There was an article, I think a month ago, I tweeted it on our hashtag, from Wissen was wirkt. It was about the difference between UK and Germany with the, I think it was tackled with the all tries thing, that not all tries get published, and that there are different approaches from the scientific and technology committee from the governments, and that the German committee is not very powerful. So my question is how we can maybe challenge our governmental organs or organizations that we have to be more open to science, and maybe implement more structured structures that empower scientific based decision makings in politics.
Okay, I mean, just taking your example of all trials, what I can say is that what we could say to politicians is, you've been complaining all the time that interest groups have been, skewing the results, and we're getting wrong results because of that. If you are serious about that, and if you want to make sure that you really get evidence-based results that are not biased, then you've got to implement something like all trials. I think this conditional statement is very important to saying, if you want to do that, then, I mean, this is very much inside of science, and I think we can even kind of ask for this or demand this within science, that if you want to have good, reliable results, you need all trials, something like all trials, and so that you don't have the file drawer problem, which is known. Yeah.
My question was, I don't know if it came really over, how we can empower our structured, maybe the Scientific and Technology Committee, to be more, not more scientific, science-based, but be more, more active and more, so that they are more stronger and maybe have a better impact on the government.
So pressurizing, how can we pressurize other science organizations to insist more on things like all trials?
The science and technology
structures that we have inside our government.
Yeah. Inside the government or inside the science bodies?
The Wissenschaftsausschuss.
Okay.
That was mentioned in this article. That is not very strong and is more in a Kleinkrieg with political hickhack. I don't know.
I think we can just say many decisions have been wrong in the past. So if you want to make it, if you want to improve that, you have to take what we've learned from our mistakes into consideration to stop them in the future. I think this is something where we can put pressure on and take examples like in the medical field to say what went wrong, how can we change that, more than kind of saying something about it is going to be, or writing about it and publishing how things have really worked in other countries like all trials. I'm not sure what else we can do. We can't beat them into following our
policies. I think in the UK we have a strong science and technology committee within government, and like just recently they've got a My Science inquiry where they're opening it up to constituents to send in recommendations of what they should research and what they should inquire in. And I think we work really closely with the Science and Technology Committee, and I think it's one of the strengths.
So my question is how we get our German committees more to work, maybe more efficient, like the ones in Britain. I don't know.
We need to infiltrate those organizations, but it's going to be hard.
I'm sorry, but we should probably move on to the last question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's often said that scientists should not really interfere with politics, and they should just communicate their science to the public and to the politics, and then the policymakers should then do something with it. For example, I think it's said by Christian Drosten also that he's just communicating, and then it's the task of the policymakers to gather all the information from the different sciences and then derive some decision from that. But I think, I'm not sure I agree with that, because there seems not to be a formalized procedure or any method or something to gather all the information from the different sciences and then to do something with it. It's just maybe the intuition of the politicians, or what is supposed to do that. And I'm thinking that it might be a better idea to kind of establish some kind of more decision support within the sciences, like in an interdisciplinary way, like looking holistically at.
Parliament or scientists need to be really involved with government inquiries and government calls for evidence, because I think governments they put out a lot of ask for a lot of information, and make sure scientists need to make sure that those calls are on their radar and they're putting in the evidence that they need to be putting in.
Yeah, and I think especially, for example, in development research, it is quite common to have some more holistical view and use people from different fields like agricultural research and medical research and pharmaceutical research, and they actually do some decision support sometimes, like how can we, with the limited amount of money we have available, how can we save the most lives or something, and then they do some research decision support, incorporating different expertise from different fields. And I think I'm missing that sometimes in other political decisions. And yeah, what do you think about this problem?
Right. Just to point out, I think what you mentioned about decision support, that's clearly something we should be doing so that we understand what the policymakers want, what the targets are. So we have to be in interaction with them. And once we know that, we can say, if you want to achieve that, you've got to do such and such, or at least these 2 or 3 different pathways. But where I just see, if I don't change my hat and say, okay, I'm also a member of the Social Democratic Party, then I can say, okay, as a member of the Social Democratic Party, I want to achieve such and such. That's a different question. But if I'm just acting as a scientific advisor, I have to understand what do the policymakers want, and then supporting them is absolutely something we need to do. I agree with that.
Yeah, like the values, the underlying values is something that needs to come like from the policymakers and from the public into the scientific field. Sure, right. But yeah, I mean, I think that the gathering of information and the decision support might not be something that should be left to the policymakers. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I understand.
Especially if they have no idea.
May I just jump in on that? Well, referring to the decarbonization of energy, yes, scientists should point the way, because so far politicians have got the science wrong or ignored it because of economic interests. So if you see that a government is going in a very self-harmful direction and this will lead to destructive consequences, I would raise my hand and keep saying this is wrong, the science behind climate change, the science behind decarbonization of energy show that you are going in the wrong direction. Then of course, then politicians will choose their way anyway, because they are weak, they tend to be tempted by their voters' preferences, so.
And that's exactly a job for skeptically inclined people, what you just explained, Giulia. But I'm afraid our time is up, so thank you very much again. Thank you everyone for bearing with us. Thanks to our panel. Giulia Conforto, Amardeo Sarma, and Kellie Payne. And I'm not sure. Itt talán egy kicsit. Oh, sorry. I'm speaking in Hungarian? Sorry. But tomorrow morning we start with the panel on conspiracy theories at 10 a.m. sharp, just as usual for this weekend. So thank you very much again, and have a lovely evening, everyone. See you tomorrow, and take care. Thank you.